What's going on, guys? My name is Kalen Vasher, and you are now tuned into another episode of the Kalen Vasher Show. Before we get started, as always, just want to give a quick shout out to everybody listening. As always, you guys are much, much appreciated. If you want to connect with me and talk about anything basketball or sports in general, my links are down below on the screen at TKVS Podcast on everything except for Twitter. That'll be at Kalen Vasher Show or at Kalen Vasher on my personal account, where I also talk about basketball a lot. So either one of those two will do just fine. Coming on here this morning, recapping game number 2 from the Eastern Conference Finals between the Miami Heat and the Boston Celtics, where the Heat would walk out of TD Garden last night with a 111-105 victory. And man, let me just say, I think that this has the potential to go 7. Don't want to get too high on the Heat. I do really like the Heat and everything that they've been able to done, the culture that they have built, not only for just this season or the past 2 or 3 years, but what they've done for the past 10, 12, 15 years. The Heat are truly up there, and I think with the Boston Celtics, the Los Angeles Lakers, the San Antonio Spurs as one of the biggest, most successful franchises in NBA history. They might not have the championships to line up with those other franchises, but just the way that their players carry themselves, the way that their coaches carry themselves, their front office carries themselves, the way that they draft, the way that they scout. I definitely think that the Miami Heat are one of the best organizations in basketball. But even with all that said, I don't necessarily know if I have them going back home and winning both games. Jimmy Butler, certified dog, and I'm going to talk a lot more about him later on in the show. But I wanted to start this episode off with the Boston Celtics side of the ball, just because I picked the Celtics in 6, and last night I really, really, really thought that the Celtics were going to be able to hang on, especially after the first quarter that we saw from Jason Tatum. Jason Tatum last night finished the first quarter 4 for 6 for 12 points compared to his game 1 first quarter where he went 3 for 7 for only 7 points. So he was way more efficient, way more effective. And he just looked aggressive, even after whistles. You know, sometimes when there's whistles blown and players are not necessarily, they're just kind of jacking around with the ball, he was still going to the hole and finishing some of those layups on some of his foul calls. So he seemed very, very locked in. Derek White even found his groove early on in the first half going into halftime. He finished with 9 points after knocking down a few threes. So, and I've always said that I thought Derek White was going to be a reason why that the Celtics were successful as they were. I think that he's one of the key reasons, one of the main reasons why they were able to make it to the finals last year, and I don't think that they'll be able to go back without him. So the Celtics didn't necessarily do too much wrong. We're going to get into the Grant Williams and Jimmy Butler scuffle here in a minute, if you even want to call that a wrong play. But I really think that the Celtics were poised to make a really, really good statement win last night, and they just unfortunately couldn't pull it out. Jimmy Butler, like I was saying, was absolutely phenomenal, not only just in the fourth quarter, but for the whole game, really. I think Jimmy Butler, even though he's not necessarily, in my eyes, looked at as superstar MVP caliber player, he's just one of those guys. Your Kobe's, your Mike's, he's just one of those guys who you want on your team because he's such a killer. Combined in the fourth quarter, him and Bam Adebayo combined for 17 points, where the Celtics' 2 stars, Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, only combined for 8 points on one made field goal between the both of them. That absolutely cannot happen. But getting back on Jimmy Butler, Jimmy Butler has personified what it means to truly be Heat culture. I think he made his previous stops in Chicago, the team that drafted him, and that was really good. He had a good coach under him in Tom Thibodeau. He then went on to Minnesota, and we all know what happened there. But it's like whenever Jimmy got to Miami and he was finally in South Beach and he bought into the entire Heat culture, I think that something just clicked for him. And Jimmy's always been a dog. Jimmy has always been a bucket. Jimmy's always been the tenacious defender. I can remember back in my early days of being a fan of those Miami Heat teams back in the early 2010s. And just knowing that Jimmy Butler was somebody that they're going to throw out there and he's going to defend at a high level. Now he went to Minnesota and we started to see a little bit more of a scorer out of Jimmy Butler. And now he's in Miami. He has full creative control to do whatever he wants on the basketball floor. And so I think that's really important for Jimmy's game. But kind of getting back into that Heat culture, like I was just talking about a few minutes ago, whether it be the way Pat Riley controls his team and he wants them to come in to training camp and to preseason looking a certain way. And I seen somebody on Twitter say it, but it's like everybody in the Miami Heat franchise has that same amount of like crazy. They have that same amount of don't give a, you know what I mean? And I think Jimmy just falls into that category 100%, like a perfect puzzle piece. And the one thing that I really like about the Heat, and that's always been their calling card, was just the fact that they have necessarily never needed superstar talent. And I know that sounds crazy because you had LeBron and you had D-Wade for so many years, but the fact that the Heat have been able to stay relevant and contend and play for championships without having a quote-unquote true MVP superstar caliber player for the past 5, 6, 7 years is actually amazing. And to me, it doesn't go unnoticed. One thing I really like about the Heat is the fact that their players just step up and they play basketball. Growing up, I was a basketball player, and that's one thing that was always apparent when you're on the basketball floor. Sometimes teams are more talented, so teams like the Lakers or teams like the Celtics might have more talent. They might have the better players, but like Kevin Durant says, hard work beats talent when talent fails to work. And that's 100% factual, 100% true. Caleb Martin finished with 25. Bam Adebayo was an absolute monster last night. He finished with 22, 17 rebounds, and 9 assists. So really an assist side of a triple-double. And Gabe Vincent even came up and hit a lot of big shots late in the fourth quarter. He also iced the game with some free throws down the stretch. So that's one thing that has always been true about Heat culture. And a lot of those guys that I just named were either undrafted, or at least Gabe Vincent was undrafted. Caleb Martin was undrafted or a very late draft pick. And they just always seem to make an impact on the team. Kyle Lowry didn't even score last night, but his presence was felt. Anytime the camera panned over to the bench, he was up, he was clapping, he was encouraging his teammates. Even when the Celtics went on a little bit of a run, like you just never feel like the Heat are actually out of the game. And that's actually one of the things that made me pick them to be one of the finals favorites when we were in the bubble. I just like the way that the matchups that they had going into the series with Giannis and the Bucks back in 2020 was. And I truly believe that they had a chance to win an NBA championship. They just happened to run into LeBron James and Anthony Davis. But now this year, and it's still a lot to be seen. It's still a lot of basketball to be played. We're only 2 games in. But that's another thing that I feel like the Heat understand. They understand what it's like to be the underdog. They understand what it's like to kind of be counted out in the situation that Boston is now in. So I don't even think that Boston can necessarily say that they're going to come out and play their best basketball game 3, because Miami also knows that they're going to play their best basketball game 3. If you can go up 3-0 on the favorite in the Eastern Conference Finals, that is a true demoralizing thing to do. Same way for the Nuggets and the Lakers series. Let the Nuggets go up 3-0 on the road in crypto. All like morale in the Lakers locker room, I feel like it's going to break apart. And again, like Anthony Edwards said earlier on in the first round, it's the first of 4 wins. It's not the first of 3. But when you get that 3rd win, especially when it's 3-0 and now you're on the brink of elimination and getting swept in the playoffs in the Eastern and Western Conference Finals at that, I think that's just a whole nother mental thing that you have to take into account that I don't know if either one of those two are going to be ready for it. Also, another big key for the Miami Heat last night, Duncan Robinson knocked in a few threes. And one thing that I really, really wanted to talk about, and that was really on my mind even coming into this series, was the fact that this might be the last that we see of Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum on the same team. And before anybody goes crazy, I just want to make this known. I'm not trying to make it seem as though I'm putting these two great players up against each other. Jason Tatum is a great basketball player. Jaylen Brown is a great basketball player. They're both young. They both get to the basket well. They can both shoot the ball, fairly well. One may shoot better than the other, or whatever the case may be. But this is an offseason that the Boston Celtics really have to look at themselves in the mirror and find out what you want to do. Jaylen Brown will be an unrestricted free agent in 2024. So I think that's another reason that you might look to trade him, because it's like, okay, if we're sitting down and we have these two guys for the past 2 or 3 years, we have legitimately contended for an NBA championship, whether that be when we were in the Eastern Conference Finals, whether that be when we were in the finals last year or in the Eastern Conference Finals this year. But now you have to see, it just didn't work. It hasn't worked. And do you blow this whole thing up? And not necessarily say blow it up in totality and do a whole roster shakeover, but when you have Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum both needing to take over 20 shots a game, it's not going to work. I'm sorry, because we have games like we've seen throughout the playoffs, like we've seen from their careers. Either Jaylen Brown is putting up career numbers and having a great game one night and Jason Tatum's off, or Jason Tatum is going off of 51 or whatever the case. Or even like last night, Jason Tatum had a fairly decent game, or the 30-point game that he had, and then we got like 16 points out of Jaylen Brown. So it's like, but they're still taking majority of the shots. So even when Jaylen Brown is not on, he still has to take his shots because of what he provides to you as an offense. And I think that's just one thing that the Celtics have to really look at this year. Do you trade Jaylen Brown in the offseason, try and get some trade capital, because his trade value is through the roof right now, not only from what he's done this year. Even if Jaylen Brown plays terribly for the rest of these 4 or 5 games, Jaylen Brown will still be the top trade value aspect for any team anywhere in the NBA if they want to go get a high value wing player, and don't want to do it through the draft. For teams that are looking to contend, like the Hawks, like the Rockets, Jaylen Brown might be a route that you want to go. And then if you're looking at it from the Celtics point of view, as much as you love Jaylen Brown, as much as Celtics fans probably love Jaylen Brown, again, you just have to look at it and say it didn't work. What went wrong? What does our team really need? What does Jason Tatum, more importantly, really need for him to be successful as the leader of your team? Because it's never been in question who the true leader of your team was. And I know a few seasons ago when the Celtics went to the finals, the whole narrative kind of switched, and they were saying, we finally did it. Y'all said we couldn't do it. Y'all said we couldn't play for an NBA championship or make it to the finals, and now we did. But also, you have to look at the fact that y'all got there off of a missed three-pointer. Had the three-pointer go in, who knows what happens in that Eastern Conference Finals last year. So it's not even to necessarily say that last year was all the way set in stone saying that this could work. And again, I don't want to make it seem like I'm putting these two up against each other, but when you're so similar in play style and you're so similar in how much you need the ball and how much of a ball dominant player you are, as these two are, it's sometimes hard to watch just as a basketball fan. Again, they do so many things well, but it almost seems as though they come up the floor sometimes and it is, okay, so this is going to be Jaylen's possession. And then the next one, or he's going to get these 2 possessions in a row of him being the facilitator, him being the primary offensive guy this possession. And then the next 2 or 3, we're going to give it to Jason and let him run the offense and do this and do that. And I just don't feel like you can win that way. I think Boston needs to get better. They need to get faster. They need to get a little bit taller and longer. As far as it comes from the post position, I don't think Al Horford is cutting it anymore. I don't think Al Horford is a consistent enough shooter, even though his numbers will say he is. I just don't trust Al Horford. I think that the NBA is going away from players like Al Horford, who came into the league as a back-to-the-basket big and has transitioned his game to fit and to be able to still stick around into the player that he is now. But when you look at the league and look at where we're actually going in the span of big men in the NBA, like the Victor Wembanyama's that are coming out, like the Anthony Davises, like the Jokic's, like the Joel Embiid's, like they're bigger, long arms, shot blocking, defending, except for Nikola Jokic. But they move like wings, and Al Horford is just not doing that. I'm sorry. So that's one of the big things that I feel like the Celtics really need to pay attention to this offseason. And then lastly, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the head colliding incident between Jimmy Butler and Batman Grant Williams. I know in post game there was a question asked to Jaylen Brown, and did they feel like Grant Williams, quote unquote, poked the bear? And quite honestly, I'm gonna tell you right now, Jimmy Butler is not a player that needs to be poked. Jimmy Butler was going to come with it the entire fourth quarter, regardless if that situation had happened or not. But the fact that it did happen just gave Jimmy more reason to go out and say, Grant Williams, you cannot guard me, and I'm going to prove to you why. Grant Williams actually played a pretty good fourth quarter, but again, Jimmy Butler is just that dude. Jimmy Butler is a psychopath, and he showed y'all why he's a psychopath. And I mean that in the most respectful way possible. But it's just certain things you don't do. There's certain players you don't poke. We've seen it numerous times over in the playoffs with guys like LeBron, with guys like Jimmy Butler. Sometimes it's best to just shut up and play basketball. You don't have to prove to us how much of a tough guy you are. You don't have to prove to us how much you're not scared of your opponent. Sometimes it's okay to be respectful on the basketball floor and not give them any extra incentive, because now Jimmy's going to come in for the next 4 or 5 games with that mindset. Grant Williams still think that he can play with me. Grant Williams probably think that that fourth quarter back in Boston was just a fluke. Grant Williams probably think that it took me all 4 quarters to actually tee up and get going. So now, you know what? I fully expect Jimmy to come out game 3, first quarter, frying Grant Williams. And he asked for it. And Jimmy has never been one to run from smoke. Jimmy is not going to run from smoke. Jimmy's going to keep talking about this situation, I feel like, probably in postgame and pregame, just because the media is going to continue bringing it up to him. And now that's something that Grant Williams is just going to have to take on the chin. If they lose and Jimmy starts having superhuman performances, that's something that Grant Williams is going to have to take on the chin and be responsible for. He's another guy that I feel like could be on the trade block this offseason. I know that there was a lot of talk about him possibly being traded for the past few years, and he's, avoided all conversation, or actually avoided being traded. But, let them lose this season, and you're the main reason why that happened. If Jaylen Brown is as good as going, you can bet that Grant Williams, even though as valuable as a player as he is, he could even be gone this offseason. So I feel like for the Celtics, they really just got to buckle down, and your defense has just got to be perfect. I don't know how else to say it. For the Celtics to win this series, they almost have to play perfect basketball. The Miami Heat don't make too many mistakes. When you look at their roster full of veterans, Kevin Love, Jimmy Butler, Kyle Lowry, just to name a few, even Udonis Haslem, guys that don't play, they're very, very smart basketball players. They've been around it for a very long time. So you're not just going to beat the Boston Celtics off of pure athleticism, pure skill. You're going to beat them by playing perfect basketball. And so now on the flip side, the Celtics have to do the exact same thing if they want to get back in this series. Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum both have to step up their games. They both have to play, again, perfect basketball if they want a chance to win. But I know I picked the Celtics in 6, and that still reigns true. I still think the Celtics have a very good shot at winning this series. Will it happen? It's up in the air, and I'm teetering on the side of no, just because of where mentally they probably are, how demoralizing it is to now drop home court advantage, and now you're going on the road in a hostile environment in one of the best arenas and fan bases in the NBA in Miami, and you have to win 2 games. So Again, this series is very, very far from over. There's still a lot of basketball to be played, but the Celtics got to figure it out and figure it out fast as Game 3 is approaching, or quite frankly, they're just going to be eliminated. So that's my Game 2 recap for the Eastern Conference Finals. Check my next video for the Game 3 recap of the Western Conference Finals after the Lakers and Nuggets head back to Crypto to play Game 3. Again, if you want to connect with me and talk about anything basketball or just sports in general, all of my social media links are down below, including my Twitter at Kalen Vasher or at Kalen Vasher Show. And until next time, I'll see you guys.